They expected him to scream when the gravity field doubled. He didn't. The human prisoner remained standing as the deck plates trembled beneath his boots, blood dripping slowly from his nose, eyes locked forward with an expression that unsettled the entire war council watching from above. This was not how captives were supposed to behave, and every alien in the chamber knew it. Because this war had already consumed 300 worlds. And it had started because humanity refused to kneel. For 47 standard cycles, the Zaltharan Imperium had expanded without resistance. Ancient, vast, and merciless, their fleets erased civilizations the way storms erase sand patterns. Species surrendered before the first bombardment. Those that did not were remembered only as ash rings in empty space. Humans were supposed to surrender too. They were young, loud, divided, and reckless. They had barely discovered faster-than-light travel when Zaltharan war probes entered soul space. The Imperium offered them the same choice it offered everyone. Submit, disarm, and become a resource world. Humanity answered with silence. Then they destroyed the probes. That single act ignited the war. What followed shocked the galaxy. Human fleets fought like cornered animals, improvising tactics no academy had ever taught. They used civilian ships as decoys, turned mining lasers into weapons, and detonated their own stations to trap enemy armadas. They lost worlds, yes, but every victory cost the Imperium more than it had ever paid before. Still, the Imperium was ancient. It adapted. It learned. And eventually, it crushed Earth's outer colonies. That was when Commander Elias Ward was captured. He was not a general. He was not a politician. He was not even a hero by human standards. He was a logistics officer, responsible for supply routes and evacuation corridors. When his convoy was ambushed, he stayed behind to buy time for civilians to escape. The Imperium took him alive by accident. They did not kill prisoners immediately. They studied them first. Now Elias stood in the center of the Zaltharan High Tribunal chamber, surrounded by alien technology that could disintegrate him with a thought. Gravity pressed down on him at 4 times Earth normal. The air burned his lungs. The light stabbed his eyes. And still he stood. High Strategist Vokarath observed him through the transparent barrier, 6 eyes narrowing. The human skeletal structure should have failed by now. His cardiovascular system should have collapsed. Instead, his heart rate had stabilized. Impossible. Increase the field, Vokarath ordered. The gravity surged again. Elias dropped to one knee. His hands trembled. For a moment, the council leaned forward, expecting the scream, the begging, the psychological fracture they relied on. Instead, Elias laughed. It was weak and broken, but it was laughter. That sound rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Translator drones struggled to interpret it. The Imperium had no cultural equivalent for laughter under torture. "Why do you resist?" Vokarath demanded, his voice amplified directly into Elias's neural receptors. "Your species is finished. Your fleets are broken. Your homeworld is surrounded." Elias lifted his head slowly. Blood ran from his mouth now. He wiped it away with shaking fingers and looked directly at the council. "Then why," he said hoarsely, "are you so afraid of one unarmed human?" Silence followed. That was the moment something shifted. The Imperium did not feel fear often. They were apex predators of the galaxy. But something about the way the human spoke unsettled them. There was no defiance in his tone. No hatred. Only certainty. Vokarath leaned forward. "You believe yourself important." "No," Elias replied. "I believe you've already lost." A murmur spread through the chamber. Vokarath signaled for the gravity field to return to tolerable levels. Elias collapsed to the floor, gasping, but alive. The strategist raised a claw. "You will explain," Vokarath said. "Slowly." Elias took several breaths before speaking again. You think this war is about territory, resources, control. That's how you fight. That's how you've always fought. He coughed, pain lacing every word. For us, it's not. Vokaratha's eyes flicked to the analysts. They detected no deception. Explain, the strategist repeated. Elias pushed himself up until he was sitting. You studied our weapons, our ships, our biology. You never studied why we fight. A projection flared to life above the chamber, showing burning human colonies. Cities in ruin. Civilians fleeing through vacuum corridors. You think this breaks us? Elias continued. It doesn't. It teaches us. The council watched, confused. When you destroyed our outer colonies, you didn't cripple us. You removed our fear of loss. Everything you take now just sharpens the knife. Vokaratha's mandibles clicked in irritation. You speak in metaphors because you have nothing else. Elias shook his head weakly. No, I speak plainly. You don't understand humans because you've never fought a species that doesn't need hope to keep going. That statement froze the room. Explain, Vokarath said again, more carefully this time. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day, Elias said. Storms, quakes, predators, disease. We didn't survive because we were strongest. We survived because quitting never worked. The projection shifted. Human history flashed across the chamber. Wars, famines, plagues, rebuilding. Again and again. You break our cities, Elias said. We build underground. You blockade our worlds. We grow food in vacuum. You kill our soldiers. Their children take their place. Vokarath felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest cavity. This war ends one of two ways, Elias said quietly. Either you wipe us out completely, or you exhaust yourselves trying. And you believe that is possible? Vokarath asked. I know it is, Elias answered. The chamber fell silent again. Strategist Vokarath had overseen the extinction of 12 species. None had spoken like this. None had sounded so certain while bleeding on the floor. You are one prisoner, Vokarath said. One insignificant life. Elias smiled faintly. That's what scares you. Because if I'm right, then every human is a problem you can't solve with fleets. A data analyst interrupted, voice shaking. Hi, strategist. Long-range sensors are detecting unusual activity. Vokarath did not look away from Elias. Explain. Human civilian vessels are entering contested space, the analyst said. Unarmed. Broadcasting open signals. Elias closed his eyes. Relief washed over his face. They're doing it already, he whispered. Vokaratha's eyes snapped to the projection. Thousands of small ships appeared on the display, drifting toward Zaltharan lines. No weapons. No shields raised. Just open broadcasts. What is this? The strategist demanded. Elias looked back up. It's what you never planned for. The feed switched to audio. Human voices filled the chamber. Calm. Steady. Ordinary. We're evacuating refugees. We're carrying medical supplies. We're here to help anyone hurt by the fighting. Vokarath recoiled slightly. They violate war protocols. Elias nodded. We don't care. A commander shouted. They're clogging our firing lanes. Because if you fire, Elias said softly, you prove everything I'm saying. Vokarath stared at the human. A realization crept into his mind, slow and terrifying. The Imperium's strength depended on fear, on inevitability, on the belief that resistance was pointless. Humans were refusing to play the game. You weaponized compassion, Vokarath said in disbelief. Elias shook his head. No, we weaponized endurance. The strategist looked at the prisoner again, really looked at him. Broken, bleeding, unarmed, and yet, somehow, winning. "What happens if we execute you?" Vokarath asked. Elias did not hesitate. "Someone else takes my place. Then another. Then another. This doesn't stop with me." The chamber alarms began to sound softly. Reports flooded in. Neutral species were watching, recording, broadcasting human actions across the galaxy. The Imperium had never cared about opinion before. Now it mattered. Vokarath realized something then, something no Zaltharan strategist had ever been forced to consider. This war was no longer about conquest. It was about narrative. And the humans were winning it without firing a shot. Vokarath dismissed the gravity field entirely. Elias collapsed, but guards caught him before he hit the floor. The strategist rose slowly. "Take the prisoner to medical," he ordered. The council erupted in protest. "Silence," Vokarath commanded. He looked down at Elias one last time. "You have started something," the strategist said. Elias met his gaze, exhausted but unbroken. "No," he replied. "You did." And for the first time in centuries, the Imperium did not know how the war would end. The Imperium had never delayed an execution before. That alone told the galaxy something was wrong. Commander Elias Ward regained consciousness in a room that felt too gentle to be real. The gravity was normal. The air was cool and breathable. His injuries had been sealed with bioregenerative gel that hummed softly against his skin. He knew enough about Zaltharan medical tech to understand the message being sent. They were not done with him. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. A translucent barrier surrounded the chamber, but there were no visible restraints. No guards. Just observation nodes embedded in the walls, watching every breath he took. They wanted to see how humans behave when given relief instead of pain. Across the Imperium, reactions fractured along unfamiliar lines. Military command demanded immediate execution, citing doctrine older than recorded history. Intelligence divisions argued for continued observation. Political envoys warned that neutral systems were already questioning Zaltharan morality. None of that mattered as much as what humans were doing. Civilian ships continued to pour into contested space. Medical barges. Evacuation transports. Journalists broadcasting live feeds from hull-mounted cameras. Every vessel transmitted the same message, translated into 100 galactic languages. "We are not here to fight. We are here because people are suffering." The Imperium fired warning shots at first. Precision blasts that shattered vacuum just meters from human hulls. No response came. The ships continued drifting forward, shields lowered, engines throttled back to minimum burn. Then an Imperial cruiser fired directly. The human ship vanished in a flash of plasma. Thousands died instantly. The broadcast did not cut out. The camera feed survived long enough to show the wreckage, the drifting debris, the sudden silence where voices had been moments before. Then the signal ended, and something broke across the galaxy. Elias watched the footage in silence when it was shown to him. He did not cry. He did not shout. He simply closed his eyes for a long moment, then looked back at the unseen observers. "You see now," he said quietly. High Strategist Vokarath stood behind the barrier, claws clasped behind his back. He had ordered the footage shown. He needed to see the human reaction firsthand. What he did not expect was the lack of surprise. "You anticipated this," Vokarath said. "Yes," Elias replied. "We knew you'd fire eventually." "Then why send them?" "Because now everyone else knows too." The strategist did not answer. He turned away, mandibles clicking in agitation. Reports were flooding in faster than command channels could process them. Neutral systems condemned the Imperium. Allied species demanded explanations. Trade routes began to close. For the first time in Zaltharan history, fear crept into strategic calculations. Not fear of defeat. Fear of isolation. Vokarath returned to the barrier. Your people sacrifice civilians for propaganda. Elias met his gaze. We warned them. Every ship knew the risk. They volunteered anyway. That is madness. That is choice, Elias said. Something you've never allowed anyone. Vokarath studied the human carefully. There was no triumph in his expression. Only exhaustion and grief. That unsettled the strategist more than defiance ever could. What happens next? Vokarath asked. Elias leaned back against the wall. More ships will come. Not just human. Aid groups. Observers. Eventually, even your allies will hesitate to stand beside you. You assume moral pressure matters. I assume you need stability, Elias said. Empires don't survive being questioned. Vokarath said nothing. Elsewhere, humanity argued with itself. On Earth and its surviving colonies, protests erupted. Some demanded retaliation. Others demanded total withdrawal. Governments fractured under the strain of impossible choices. But the civilian ships kept coming. A teacher from Nairobi piloted one transport. A retired miner from Luna flew another. Families volunteered entire generational savings to fund relief convoys. No single authority coordinated it. That was the most terrifying part for Imperial analysts. Humans were acting without permission. Zaltharan commanders reported increased hesitation among their crews. Young officers questioned firing orders. Veteran gunners delayed targeting locks by fractions of seconds that saved lives. The Imperium had always relied on obedience. Humans introduced doubt. Elias was brought before the tribunal again 3 cycles later. This time, there was no gravity torture. No humiliation. Just a circle of ancient beings staring at him with something close to curiosity. You have destabilized multiple sectors, one matriarch said. Elias shrugged weakly. You destabilized them first. Another voice cut in. Your strategy relies on emotional contagion. No, Elias replied. It relies on visibility. Vokarath watched silently as the discussion unfolded. He had argued for this meeting, against considerable opposition. He needed to understand whether this human was an anomaly or a warning. You are losing the war, a counselor said flatly. Elias nodded. Yes. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. And yet you claim victory. Yes. Explain. Elias took a breath. Wars end long before the last battle. They end when one side realizes the cost is no longer worth the outcome. And you believe that moment has come? I believe it's approaching, Elias said. And when it does, it won't be because of our fleets. Vokarath finally spoke. What do you want? The chamber fell silent. This was not a question the Imperium asked lightly. Elias looked around the room. I want this to stop. That is vague. I want you to withdraw from human space. Recognize our sovereignty. Open negotiations. And if we refuse? Elias met Vokarath's gaze. Then this continues. Forever. The strategist felt a chill. Not because of the threat, but because of the certainty behind it. You would condemn your species to endless suffering? A counselor demanded. No, Elias replied. We'd endure it. That word echoed through the chamber. Endure. Vokarath dismissed the tribunal without a decision. For the first time in recorded Imperium history, a human prisoner was returned to his quarters alive, unharmed, and unthreatened. That alone sent shockwaves through military command. Elias spent the following cycle speaking with diplomats, analysts, even philosophers. They asked about human psychology, about why individuals would risk everything for strangers. Elias told them the truth. We learned a long time ago that survival isn't individual. It's collective. Outside, the galaxy watched. The Imperium attempted a media counteroffensive, broadcasting images of destroyed human warships, emphasizing their overwhelming power. The effort backfired. Each image reminded viewers who had fired first. Neutral systems imposed sanctions. Some allied species quietly withdrew support. Trade convoys rerouted. Resource shortages began to appear in Imperial logistics projections. Vokarath stared at the data late into a rest cycle he did not take. He had commanded fleets through black holes and supernova fronts without hesitation. This was different. There was no target to strike, no formation to shatter. Only patience. He summoned Elias again, this time alone. "You have altered the battlefield," Vokarath said. Elias nodded. "You did too, when you invaded us. What if we offer a ceasefire?" Elias did not smile. "That depends on the terms. Conditional withdrawal. Joint humanitarian corridors. That's a start." Vokarath hesitated. "You understand the precedent this sets?" "Yes," Elias said softly. "So do you." The strategist studied him. "Why you?" Elias frowned. "What do you mean? Why did this fall to you?" Elias thought for a long moment. "Because I stayed behind," he said. "Someone had to." Vokarath considered that. An entire war pivoting on a single human who refused to abandon others. "You will be remembered," the strategist said. Elias shook his head. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" "That next time," Elias replied. "You think twice before calling us insignificant." The chamber alarm sounded softly again. New data streams. New reactions. Across the galaxy, the narrative had shifted. Humans were no longer reckless newcomers. They were something else. Something that did not break. And the Imperium, for the first time, began to plan not for victory, but for coexistence. The ceasefire announcement did not come with celebration. It came with confusion. Across the Imperium, military channels froze as the order propagated. All offensive operations against human-aligned space were to halt immediately. Weapons hotlines were suspended. Targeting locks disengaged. For commanders raised on absolute obedience and relentless expansion, the command felt unreal, like a corrupted transmission. Some refused to believe it. A destroyer group on the Kesh Rift delayed compliance by 11 minutes, long enough to fire a final salvo at an empty human position. No one cheered. No one marked the strike as a victory. The silence afterward felt heavier than any defeat. On Earth, the announcement spread like a shockwave. People gathered in streets and shelters, staring at projected feeds that repeated the same words over and over again. Temporary ceasefire. Negotiations pending. Human sovereignty under review. No one trusted it. Humanity had learned the hard way that empires did not pause unless forced. And yet, this pause was real. The Imperium's fleets held position. Their guns remained cold. For the first time since the war began, nights passed without orbital bombardment. Elias Ward watched the reactions unfold from his quarters aboard the Imperium's diplomatic station. He was no longer referred to as prisoner in official documentation. He was listed as human envoy. The title felt heavier than his restraints ever had. "You don't look relieved," Vokarath observed during their next meeting. Elias shook his head. "Ceasefires are fragile. Everyone's waiting to see who blinks first. And if it is us, then you lose more than territory," Elias said. "You lose credibility." The strategist's mandibles twitched. "You humans are obsessed with perception." "No," Elias replied. "We're obsessed with memory. We remember who hurt us. We remember who tried to help." Vokarath considered that. The Imperium erased its failures from record. It archived victories. Humans archived everything. Negotiations began within days. They were messy, emotional, and unlike anything the Imperium had experienced. Human delegates argued openly with one another in front of alien observers. They disagreed. They interrupted. They changed positions mid-sentence. Imperial diplomats found it deeply unsettling. "How do you expect to reach consensus?" one matriarch demanded during an early session. "We don't," a human representative replied. "We expect compromise." That word appeared again and again. Compromise. Another concept the Imperium had rarely entertained. Elias served as a bridge, translating not just language but intent. When humans spoke of freedom, he explained it as decentralized survival. When Imperials spoke of order, he reframed it as collective security. Even so, tension simmered beneath every exchange. Then the incident happened. A fringe Imperial commander, acting without authorization, seized a human medical convoy near the frontier. The ships were disabled, boarded, and held. The news reached Earth within hours. Protests ignited instantly. Human media exploded with outrage. Ceasefire violations. Imperial betrayal. Calls for retaliation surged across networks. Military leaders warned that restraint was eroding. Elias stood in the council chamber as the reports played. Vokaratha's eyes burned with something dangerously close to shame. "I did not order this," the strategist said. "I know," Elias replied. "But intent won't matter if this escalates. What do you propose?" Elias took a breath. "Release them. Publicly. Apologize." The chamber erupted. "Impossible. Unprecedented. Humiliating." Vokarath raised a claw for silence. "What happens if we do nothing?" Elias answered immediately. "You prove every human fear correct." The strategist closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the decision was made. The Imperium released the convoy. Not quietly. Not through back channels. They broadcast the release across open frequencies, accompanied by a formal statement acknowledging unauthorized aggression and affirming commitment to the ceasefire. The galaxy held its breath. Human reaction was not what Imperial analysts predicted. There was anger, yes. Grief for the terror endured by the captured crews. But there was also something else. Recognition. They admitted fault, people said. They didn't double down. Maybe this is real. Trust did not appear overnight. But suspicion softened into something unfamiliar. Cautious hope. Within weeks, joint humanitarian zones were established. Human doctors worked alongside Imperial medics. Refugees from destroyed systems received aid without allegiance checks. Elias visited one such zone on the border of former contested space. He watched a Zaltheran medic carefully adjust a breathing apparatus on a human child. The alien's movements were precise, almost reverent. "Why are you doing this?" Elias asked quietly. The medic paused. "Because the child is alive," she said. "That should be enough." Something tightened in Elias's chest. Back on the diplomatic station, fractures within the Imperium deepened. Hardliners accused Vokarath of weakness. Younger strategists, raised during the war, questioned old doctrines. "We are losing our identity," one counselor argued. "No," Vokarath replied. "We are discovering it." The strategist had changed. He spoke less of dominance, more of sustainability. Less of expansion, more of stability. Elias watched this evolution with quiet fascination. "You're adapting," Elias said during a private conversation. Vokarath inclined his head. "So are you." Humanity changed too. The war forced introspection on a species that had always rushed forward. They debated their role in the galaxy. Were they catalysts for chaos or agents of balance? Elias received messages from Earth daily. Some called him a hero. Others called him naive. A few accused him of selling out human strength. He read them all. He answered none. One message stayed with him. It was from a civilian pilot whose ship had been destroyed early in the humanitarian push. The message was short. "We knew the risk. Thank you for making it matter." Elias sat with that for a long time. The formal end of hostilities came quietly. No grand ceremony. No victory parade. A document signed across multiple systems, recognizing human sovereignty and establishing non-aggression protocols. The war was over. But its consequences were only beginning. New alliances formed. Old power structures weakened. Species that had lived under imperial shadow began asserting independence. The galaxy shifted, slowly but irreversibly. Historians struggled to categorize the conflict. It defied conventional frameworks. It was not won through superior firepower or decisive battles. It was eroded, reshaped, reframed. And at the center of it all stood one human who never fired a shot. Elias declined most interviews. He returned to Earth briefly, walking through cities still bearing scars of bombardment. People recognized him sometimes. They nodded. They thanked him. They argued with him. He listened. On his final day before returning to the diplomatic station, Elias stood at a memorial overlooking a rebuilt evacuation port. Names were etched into metal, thousands of them. He traced a few with his fingers. "We didn't save everyone," he said softly. A woman standing nearby shook her head. "No," she replied. "But you reminded us who we are." Back among the stars, Bokorath watched human ships travel freely through corridors once patrolled by Imperial war fleets. The strategist felt something like pride, something like loss. "You changed us," he told Elias during their last official meeting. Elias shook his head. "You changed yourselves." Bokorath considered that, then extended a claw in a gesture that had once meant conquest and now meant respect. Elias took it without hesitation. The galaxy moved forward, uncertain but alive with possibility. Empires reconsidered their paths. Species reevaluated their assumptions. And humanity, still young, still flawed, carried something forward that no fleet could destroy: the refusal to stop trying. Years later, historians would argue about the precise moment the war truly ended. Some would point to the ceasefire declaration. Others to the release of the captured medical convoy. A few would insist it ended the instant the first unarmed human ship crossed into contested space and refused to turn back. Elias Ward never bothered correcting them. He had learned that endings were rarely clean, and beginnings even less so. What mattered was what came after, when the noise faded and choices remained. The diplomatic station above the neutral world of Keth Prime had grown into something new. Where once it had been a fortress of observation and control, it now functioned as a crossroads. Human freighters docked beside Imperial carriers. Languages overlapped in open halls. Disagreements still happened, but they ended in negotiation instead of plasma fire. Elias walked those halls quietly, older now, lines etched deeper into his face. He wore no uniform. No medals. Just simple civilian clothing that marked him as human and nothing more. "You could have taken command," a junior diplomat once told him. "You could have led." Elias had smiled gently. "Leadership isn't about standing in front. Sometimes it's about knowing when to step aside." The Imperium changed slower than humanity, but it did change. Expansion doctrines were rewritten. Military academies added entire courses on asymmetric ethics and narrative warfare. Cadets studied the human conflict not as a failure, but as a lesson. One phrase appeared repeatedly in Imperial strategic texts: "Never underestimate endurance." Bokorath retired from active command not long after the treaty was signed. His final address to the council was brief. "We believed inevitability was our greatest weapon," he said. "We were wrong. It was our greatest weakness." He spent his remaining cycles advising younger strategists, urging them to observe rather than dominate, to listen before acting. Some followed his guidance. Others did not. Change, Elias knew, was never universal. Humanity faced its own reckoning. The war had unified them, but peace exposed old fractures. Debates raged about interstellar responsibility. Should humans intervene when other species suffered? Or had they learned the cost of involvement too well? Elias was invited to speak before Earth's planetary council. He stood beneath banners scarred by time and war, listening to representatives argue over humanity's future role. When his turn came, he spoke simply. "We didn't win because we were right," he said. "We won because we were visible. Because we refused to disappear quietly." A counselor asked, "What happens next?" Elias paused. "Next, we choose carefully. Compassion without arrogance. Strength without conquest." Some applauded. Some remained silent. That was enough. Beyond politics, something quieter unfolded across the galaxy. Cultural exchanges flourished. Human art appeared in alien spaces. Alien music found human audiences. Children grew up knowing that the stars were not just empty threats, but neighbors. In one remote system, a joint memorial was erected where a human relief ship had been destroyed early in the war. Humans and Imperials attended the dedication together. No speeches. Just names, etched in multiple scripts. Elias stood among them, unrecognized. That suited him. A young Imperial approached him afterward, her crest barely marking adulthood. "Are you the human who broke the war?" she asked hesitantly. Elias shook his head. "No. I was just there when it cracked." She frowned, confused. "It broke because too many people refused to let it continue," Elias explained. "I was one voice among millions." She considered that, then nodded slowly. Time moved on. Elias aged. The galaxy did not wait for anyone. New conflicts flared at the edges of known space, smaller, quieter, but dangerous all the same. When violence threatened to spiral, mediators invoked the human conflict as precedent. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Elias received fewer messages as years passed. The attention shifted to newer figures, newer crises. He welcomed the quiet. One evening, aboard a transport headed toward the Sol system, Elias stood at an observation window watching stars slide past. A child nearby pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "Are there people out there?" she asked him. "Yes," Elias replied. "Are they dangerous?" He thought for a moment. "Some can be," he said. "Some are kind. Most are just trying to survive." She nodded, satisfied, very serious. "Like us. Exactly like us." The transport continued on its way, carrying ordinary lives through a universe that had nearly burned itself apart. On the anniversary of the ceasefire, a quiet broadcast played across several systems. No dramatics. No flags. Just archived footage of unarmed ships drifting through space, engines low, broadcasts open. New generations watched, puzzled by the simplicity. "They didn't shoot back?" one student asked. "No," her teacher replied. "They endured." In the Imperial archives, Elias Ward's file remained remarkably small. No combat record. No confirmed kills. Just a notation under strategic impact. Catalyst event. Human endurance reframed conflict paradigm. That line baffled analysts for decades. Elias returned to Earth for good in his later years. He lived near a rebuilt coastline, where waves rolled in endlessly, indifferent to history. He walked the shore each morning, breathing salt air, watching ships disappear beyond the horizon. Sometimes he wondered what might have happened if he had screamed under the gravity field. If he had begged? If he had broken? The galaxy would have moved on. The war would have continued. Another species might have vanished. Instead, He had stood. Not because he was brave. Not because he was strong. But because he believed that being seen mattered. On his final day, Elias sat on a bench overlooking the water. A memorial drone hovered nearby, recording personal reflections for the planetary archive. "What should we remember?" the drone asked. Elias smiled faintly. "That power doesn't always look like force," he said. "Sometimes it looks like staying when it would be easier to leave." The drone hovered silently, then departed. The waves continued. Far beyond Earth, the Imperium charted new paths. Smaller fleets. Cooperative ventures. Watchful restraint. They were no longer feared in the same way. They were no longer unquestioned. And that was all right. Across the galaxy, species remembered the war not as humanity's victory, but as a moment when inevitability cracked. When an ancient empire learned that conquest was not the only language. Children grew up hearing the story framed differently on different worlds. On some, Elias Ward was a hero. On others, a symbol. On a few, a warning. The truth was simpler. He had been a human who refused to disappear quietly. The galaxy did not become peaceful overnight. It never would. But it became something else. A place where endurance could matter as much as firepower. Where compassion could disrupt calculations. Where one unarmed prisoner could change the course of a war. If you had lived through it, you would remember the fear. The uncertainty. The disbelief when the firing stopped. And you would remember the question people asked afterward, the one that echoed across worlds and generations. What kind of species survives by refusing to give up? The answer lingered in every open corridor, every shared skyway, every unarmed ship that still flew into danger carrying nothing but aid and stubborn hope. Humanity was young. It was flawed. It was still learning. But it had shown the galaxy something impossible to forget. That sometimes the most powerful weapon was not a fleet, or a bomb, or a throne. Sometimes it was the courage to stand, unarmed, and endure.